Welcome back, everyone, to Party Talk, where we empower leaders in youth drug prevention. I'm talking with my man, Jeremiah here. This is actually our first time meeting, but our intern, Caleb, who's running our social media, said, you've got to talk to this guy. And so I'm just excited to connect with you, Jeremiah. Why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us where you're from, what you're doing in school, all that good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, my name is Jeremiah Kennell. I am a junior here at GCU. I'm from Washington State. This is actually my first year here at GCU. I transferred from a school in Washington, where I played a couple years of college baseball, and then I transferred to GCU because I realized I wanted a life. So the college sports take so much time, and I mean, you know, if you know anything about, I'm sure there's tons of people that are playing sports and everything growing up. To play college or professional is the ultimate dream and the goal and the reason that you put in so much time and effort. So that was my goal, and I did it, and it was great while it lasted. But eventually, the time commitment sometimes is not worth it anymore, and that was the case for me. So
okay, well, that makes sense. It sounds like you really aligned your goals with what you were pursuing, because you knew that you wouldn't do this forever. There was going to be an end line. And at some point you kind of have to count the cost, right? Like, what's the cost of staying in baseball? Well, it's all my time, all my energy. I want to do something else with it. So
exactly. Yes.
Tell me a little bit more, because here's what's going to happen. I'm going to share this with my people who are in drug prevention. And there's always, no matter what happens, there will always be like generational gaps. And we'll be like, what did that generation experience? Can you just tell me a little bit about, what do you think are unique challenges that that Gen Z faces that maybe other generations didn't have to deal with? Do you have any ideas?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is there are obviously positives from technology and social media, but I would say just as many positives are negatives. So in terms of challenges, I think that well, when it comes to the importance of image, or kind of even just how we, just what a relationship, just the general term relationship looks like. I think, you know, oh, this guy follows me and I follow him back on Instagram, whatever it is. Oh, we have some kind of a relationship. But does that hinder hinder the level of not romantic intimacy, but like just an intimate relationship, a very personal relationship that perhaps other generations didn't have a problem with getting to that level because they didn't know anything other than that, if that makes sense.
That does.
So I would say in terms of there's, I think that could all even act as evidence for why this could be, the Gen Z could be the loneliest generation that there is, or the generation that deals the most with mental health, because of loneliness and depression. Is because we take our image as seen by others through social media, through things that are not as personal as one-on-one, in-person conversations and relationships. They focus and put all their weight into that, and that has all these challenging effects, let's say. So I would say that would be the first thing that comes to my mind, is kind of everything that encompasses. This may sound a little what would it be, empathetic, but I think that the older generation might say that our younger generation is just soft, and I think that there's some validity in it. I'm not going to lie. I think that sometimes it's not that I think our generation has done good in speaking to the necessity of sharing and feeling emotions, and not necessarily feeling bad for certain emotions, especially as like a man, like being able to cry or whatever, right? Stuff like that. But I think that my generation specifically has a problem with victim mentality a little bit, and not kind of owning up to consequence. I think just being responsible for the things that you kind of have put into your life. That I mean, I'm sorry that you're dealing with this, but you kind of not necessarily started it, but you're responsible for at least some of it.
Yeah.
And so I think, but then being responsible enough to go take care of it, right?
Right.
And that I think is what does show a level of maturity and responsibility, especially as we grow up. But yeah, I know we
Yeah.
kind of diverted a little bit there, but
No, that's super interesting. I can relate to that too. I was actually at a meeting with people from all different generations last month, and this guy afterwards, he sees me as the young guy, right?
right,
Like, and he asked me, Jake, like, man, your generation, he's talking about millennials now, right? Like your
yeah,
generation getting all these trophies and not having to work for them, and
yeah,
not wanting to put in the work. And I was thinking about it too, and I was listening, because sometimes if somebody, wants to talk, I'm like, all right, let them talk. They just need to talk to somebody. So
right,
I'll listen. And he's kind of saying, you didn't fight any world wars and you're so sensitive.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm like, yeah, that's true. We probably are more sensitive than your generation. We have more jobs to choose from, so we don't have to like stick it out in a terrible situation. We probably don't have as much grit and perseverance as your generation
right,
did.
yeah.
We have more options for flying across the world and seeing
Uh-huh.
amazing stuff. Like we're fluffy to you. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
right.
And I think the same thing is happening right now, because the world is becoming more, it's like you get to choose everything about yourself and every feeling should be validated,
Mm,
which makes it difficult because you validate everyone's opinion, but then when they're competing, you're like, well, don't talk about your opinion anymore. Uh,
right. Yeah,
so
totally. Totally.
yeah,
I think that uh the my generation specifically is so infatuated with well, how did it make you feel? Or how does this make you feel? That everything's based on your desire, your feeling, whatever. When it comes down to it, a lot of the things in which we're validating because they feel good to us are have been wrong, let's say morally, bodily, like just biologically, whether like it's just not good for you, or it's been
well,
seen as wrong by people in past history, and we're just doing it now and we're allowing it because
right.
because well, that's what makes me feel good.
Yeah.
So
And what's funny is what feels good now might not feel good in the future. So it's
yeah.
like we have to have this line, especially when it comes to like mental health and what we'll talk about in prevention, is
Mhm.
like you have to understand there's a short-term gratification and then
Yep.
there's the person you want to become. And if you have big goals, getting to be that person is going to hurt. You're going to do
Yes.
challenges.
Yeah.
And so you can't always be in your feelings. You have to have like both perspectives. So I agree with you 110%.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. I
yeah.
think I know you guys are your company is drug and alcohol prevention, right? Or at least education for
Yep.
anti those things. And I think specifically to those things where people that are in middle school to college, on the biological side, your frontal lobe isn't even, it's like 80%, well, in college, like 80% fully formed, or high school is maybe 80%, college maybe 90. And the frontal lobe is very important in decision making and being able to foresee consequences, and not consequence in a bad way, just cause and effect, right? If I do
Mhm.
this, what's going to happen from this? And so from the biological side, it's like if we uh, just can't even or don't pay attention to possible factors of just what is going to be the effect of this decision, and like you're saying, just this instant gratification or just this instant decision, well, there's no really harm in it, I'm not going to be addicted. Let's say they don't even become addicted, that's totally fine, but they're still taking part in it. There's still some effect. Every decision we make has an effect to it. So there's an importance and uh responsibility that we have to foresee as much as we can the effect to our decisions, because they don't just affect us, they affect others. And everything that comes with that. So
Yeah. Well, I love it. That was a perfect transition. Let's talk more about that. And
yeah.
can you take us, take us to maybe your town in Washington that you grew up in? Like what was it like? And then give us the scene, like in high school or middle school. Did you see
Yeah.
people using, vaping, drinking, all that stuff?
Right. Yeah. So I'm from what I would say a small to middle-sized city in Washington. So you got your Seattle, right? Millions of people. Spokane, Washington would probably be the second most well-known, where Gonzaga University is at. That's where I went to school and college, was in Spokane. Where
Okay.
I'm from is about maybe the same population of Spokane, maybe about close to 500,000 people, but not the same size in terms of like area.
Okay.
I went to private Christian school, kindergarten through 8th grade. So I would say I was pretty innocent in a way. I knew of things, but I didn't have personal instances or circumstances which I was around where things were prevalent or things were shown to me or whatever. So high school, I did expect to be quite eye opener, and in a way it was. But what I would say is, which is true for most places, is that what you want to seek out, you will find. So for me, I wasn't someone that was ever interested in drinking or smoking, vaping, and so I didn't seek it out. And sure, I would see it here and there, but it wasn't something where it was around me all the time. Now that was going into high school, or my freshman year. My sophomore year, I had about a 3-month period where I did vape. And it's really interesting because I was the guy that until those 3 months was like why, that's so stupid, there's literally no reason. And after that 3 month, looking back, it's like, that was so stupid, why would I do that? Well, the answer would be conformity. And it wasn't necessarily in terms of like an image. It was just that actually it was when I started dating this girl. She was around it and kind of did it here and there. And it's like, well, I'm dating this girl, this is what she does. It's not horrible, it's not like I'm smoking weed and getting high. So what's the I don't know, what's the worst thing that could happen? Yeah, what's the harm? What's the harm? Thankfully, it's kind of a funny story, but we ended up getting caught and I had to apologize to parents and stuff and everything. But kind of thank the Lord for it, honestly, because it is in the grand scheme of things and the possibilities that kids have to choose between different substances and stuff, it is a small thing in comparison to other things. But you don't start out with heroin. You start out with smaller things, and so yeah. So
Wow.
in terms of what I was around, I think the biggest thing is what you seek out, you'll find. But there's just no reason it's become more of a social thing than it has anything else, in my opinion. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I just want to highlight something you said is so you weren't seeking it out, right? So you didn't notice it, like it wasn't it wasn't in your lens, like you couldn't see it.
Correct.
But when it got close, is the girl you dated was doing it. So you probably felt weird not doing that in that circle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think I'm not really sure why. I don't have a whole ton of like memories in terms of like how I was feeling towards it. Probably because I was just like, that was so stupid. Let's just forget about that.
Your frontal lobe wasn't fully developed, man.
I know I wasn't. Yeah, I have an excuse, right? Well, I think that what it is I think the biggest part is that, at least for myself, I didn't think about the effect. And this was as far as I know, and in my opinion, my sophomore year of high school. So that would have been like 2017 was like the year. 2016, 2017 was like the year that vaping was like the thing.
Yeah.
This was even before like jewels, like this, like small little pencils that you could just whip out and start vaping from. This
Yep.
was like the big, what were called box mods, like huge, like big
Yeah.
things. People would do like tricks, like smoke tricks with it. I don't know. And so this was like right when it was starting, and it was just like, this was the thing to do. There wasn't a whole lot of, let's say, like research in terms of the health effects. So you didn't hear a whole lot about that. But I mean, even as a kid, you still know it's like, this is pretty much smoking. And you grow up hearing about, you know, the 2000s, hearing about, oh, 1990s was this huge era for finding out, even maybe before that, that smoking was this, is just so bad, right? So bad for
Yep.
you in so many health ways.
Yeah.
So it's just not thinking about the effect of anything you're doing and the effect that it has on other people, you know?
Yeah.
So
Wow. Yeah, dude. Well, I mean, what's cool now is they have more data showing like if you do, let's say, use nicotine through vaping, you're 6 times more likely to also smoke cigarettes.
oh yeah,
And it makes sense that the cigarette companies have bought out the majority share of these
yeah,
vaping companies. And
yeah,
it's wild to see history repeat itself, and all the same marketing tactics that were used for cigarettes being used now with vaping.
yeah,
And just I think the dangerous thing now, even because what I want to share a positive story in a second, but like what's really
yeah.
interesting is since I, throw sober parties, right? Like
Hmm.
drug-free events for people. And before it was like, oh, well, you can't bring a backpack in because, like we don't want you bringing in beer or anything like
Right.
that. Now it's like you could hide a vaping product with THC in it. You can hide it anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's just a little bit, you have to be more on the lookout. And when I teach people how to do it, they always ask that question of like, well, how do you make sure no one's gonna, sneak something in?
Yeah.
And the answer is you can never be 100% certain. That's a risk
Right.
anyone takes just by walking around or hosting anything. But you can be the one to have enough confidence in what you're doing to say, if you think someone is high or drinking or drunk, or you smell something, you just have the confidence to tell them, hey, this is not your party. You got to go, because if anything happens, like I'm at fault because I'm hosting
Right.
this event. And so it's just really interesting the way things have changed so that it's easier to hide. But I want to highlight something that you said. And just like you talked about wanting to conform.
Hmm.
And this last week, I was in Los Angeles doing this conference, and it was the students who typically are in trouble, the ones who have been identified as like needing the most assistance. And they put on a leadership program for them because they usually don't get to do leadership programs.
Hmm.
But a lot of them, what you'll find is like people who've been through adversity can achieve amazing things because they develop that grit and perseverance to get through difficult situations. And so what will happen is when I tell people where I'm going, they'll be like, oh man, that's a tough sell. You're going to go do your drug-free platform in front of these students who are probably using. And I'm like, yes, you're correct. I'm going to do that.
Right.
And like these students need it just as much as anybody else, like
Right.
I don't live in a fairy tale world thinking that I'm going to drastically change their life in a 45-minute talk.
Mm.
But what was really cool is what at the end, this group was like, Jake, how can we have parties like you do that are drug free and get sponsors and get our friends to come to them? And
Wow.
so I'm like, I'm flying on a
That's
cloud.
like the gold mine. That's like the thing you get less than 1% of the time, right? The
Yeah.
response you get. Yeah.
And that exactly. And a
Yeah.
population, people would say, yeah, there's no way they're going to go for this.
Hmm.
And people said this to me when I started this in college too, of like, okay, yeah, you're going to go to Indiana University or Wisconsin, or Mississippi State, and you think this is going to work? I was like, yes, it works everywhere. But what was really cool is they all get up, they go get their school counselor. Hey, Miss April, come meet this guy, Jake. You got to get him to our school. He's going to teach us how to party sober. And we come over there, and one of the students follows with, and this is the moments like I wish I had like a hidden camera, just
Right.
to remember this, because she just like opened up and said, Jake, thank you for giving your message, because like I've seen how drugs affected my mom and I don't want to follow those footsteps.
Yeah.
And she said the most impactful thing that you gave me is just permission to be different, that I don't have to follow, I don't have to conform and do what everybody else wants me to do, but I can focus on my future that I want, and I can just make decisions that make me happy. And
Right.
dude, I was like melting. I was almost in tears. I was just
Wow.
like
Yeah.
this is why we do prevention. And like for people that are in this field, it's those moments you hang on to and you realize, even if we only have 45 minutes with you, or maybe we've got a longer period of time to develop leadership skills, like we live for these moments that someone gets to tell you what you're able to do for them, because we don't always get to see those moments.
Right. 100%. It's usually you trying to lay a foundation for later things to happen, right? You don't usually get to see the direct fruit. Now, sometimes you do, but yeah, that's great. I think that that's really interesting how, you said, um, she said, I'm glad that you gave me permission to be different because I've seen how it's affected my mom. And I like how you can have those, an individual could be an alcoholic because their dad was an alcoholic, or they could not be an alcoholic because their dad was an alcoholic. And yet we still see that for the most part, kids who grew up with a substance abuse parent do become that.
Mhm.
So there seems to be, well, what is that thing that creates the difference? And so maybe, like you're saying, it's one is probably education, right? That there isn't enough education for the effects that these things have, detrimental effects that can take root in your life much more quickly than we think.
Mhm.
But another thing is just how can we not only give you permission but help you to thrive, to be different,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, so that's awesome. I think too that in terms of like the conformity side, the excitement that those kids had to have a sober party shows that it's not, and this is probably different at different age levels, but it's not the substances at the party that people are going for, it's the environment at the party that they're going for, in which the substances people think have that direct link. So if we're going for this environment and the substances are a part of it, then you create a positive relationship between the substances and the party, that one causes the other. But relationship doesn't always bring causality. So if we can find a way to have that environment of a party and do it without substances, then we can create a relationship between non-subs or sober parties, like you just said, right? So I think that shows that it's we're taught that substances is what makes the party, right?
Yeah.
When that's not the case. It's a learned thing. It's not something that actually happens. It's formed in us by society, which is why I said earlier that it's a society, that drinking is a societal thing.
Yeah.
It really is. It's like, yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's a cultural norm that if you
yeah,
are going to have an event with adults, or if you're going to act like an adult,
yeah,
then you would have alcohol there.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I, I think it's, uh, I mean, I get why, in terms of like, oh, this person's turning 21. Like, sure, a big thing is, oh, now you can drink. But
Mhm.
why is it always said that, um, oh, for your birthday for 21, like, yeah, we're going out to a bar. It's like, well, what if I don't want to? Or
Yeah.
it's just the thing that you do. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I actually want to go back to, because you were mentioning how alcohol is basically synonymous with a party.
Mhm.
And even that same group I just told you about in LA, who by the end of the presentation were like, let's throw some parties. When I introduced the idea to them and said what I was doing, they said, that's not a party. They literally said that out loud to me. That's not a party. You can't have
Right.
a party without alcohol. And
Right.
like we established exactly what we're talking about, like that our culture does this though,
Mhm.
is we make alcohol equal to having a party. And if you think about it, that's actually really good marketing.
Oh, 100%.
on behalf of these companies that are able to do that and make that part of our brain of, oh, when you're with people, when you're around people, you're having a lively event. And you had mentioned too, of like that we associate the environment, like we get to know the environment. And I'm wondering if you are learning anything in school right now in psychology on how your brain connects things. So when your environment, for example, if you do always drink at a party, when you go to an event with a lot of people, your body will crave a drink because it associates it together.
Yes. I haven't learned necessarily in terms of just the environment of just like a party, but there is what's called like operant conditioning, which I don't know if you've heard about operant conditioning. So it's pretty much this idea that you become conditioned when you hear or see or any type of stimulus that takes place. It could be, like we said, here, so it'd be like through your ears or whatever, but that your mind takes up the stimulus and then the same reaction or effect happens. So when this idea kind of took place, it was it's called like Pavlov's dogs. So this researcher had dogs. He would ring a bell and then he would bring meat out to these dogs. These dogs would eat the meat. He would do this maybe like once a day for a couple weeks. He'd ring the bell. He'd do the exact same. Eventually, the dogs became trained that the bell meant that meat was coming. So then he would ring the bell and they'd salivate and he wouldn't bring anything out. So the dogs created a biological relationship between the stimulus of a bell and this meat that was going to be brought out, to the point where they naturally would start salivating when they heard the bell.
Okay, so operant conditioning, I think here's what it is. So how it relates to prevention is when you're, let's say talking with young person and they're saying, oh, let's say weed, like number one reason I hear people smoke weed is to deal with my anxiety.
Right.
But what they're doing is, let's say the trigger, right? The bell is their anxiety.
Yeah.
They ring the bell of, oh, I'm anxious. They pull out that device, they smoke, and it provides a temporary relief. Mm-hmm. Then what happens is the brain says, ooh, that's good, right? It's a reward. It's like the meat.
Yeah.
It tastes good. I like that. And that's what dopamine does. It rewards us for healthy behavior like food. But now, since they're taking, they're using marijuana, cannabis, THC, like it's giving them that sense. So now they associate it with anxiety and it's relieving it. So next time they have it, they use it. But what happens instead in the middle of when they're not using is their anxiety increases because they're experiencing basically mini withdrawals as they become addicted. And life happens. So anytime they use, and in our country, we do this too, right? We're like, oh, I did terrible on this test. Man, I just need a drink. Oh, I rocked this test. Let's celebrate. Let's go drink.
Yeah.
It's a holiday. It's a birthday. We have so many things we associate with substances that now the environment, as the bell rings, all these things happen.
Yeah.
We're conditioned to go to a substance.
Yeah. And then when you take part in those, you reinforce that thing which is coming to you. You reinforce the dopamine rush, the whatever it is, all those neurotransmitters. And then there becomes a time where that reinforcement isn't good enough. So then you have to go to the next thing, which is why, no one starts at the highest level of drug. You start at the bottom and then you eventually get there through trial or you just have to go to the next thing because it's not doing it for you anymore, So yeah, that the operant conditioning and then reinforcing, just like you said.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I did not know that that's what it was called. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
I was reading, I'm obsessed. I'm talking about this book all the time. Atomic Habits by James Clear. Okay. And it's honestly, I like it because he makes the stuff we're talking about easy to understand. And he referenced the environment of your environment gives you all these cues of like your behaviors, right? So if the cue is anxiety, that makes me want to smoke. he said there was a cool example. He basically said in the Vietnam War, there was like a crazy amount of our soldiers who were addicted to heroin. And the government developed this task force basically saying like, we need to deal with this because our people are going to come back home and we're going to have crazy amounts of drug users here in the country. And what they found was normally when someone goes to rehab, they come back home, they said like maybe 90% will relapse because they're thrown into the same environment with all the same triggers and cues. But since they all, like most of them became addicted while they were in Vietnam, where, you know, it was war, they were around, you know, their people who were using all the time. When they actually came back home, their environment changed. So 90% didn't relapse. It was the opposite. It was the flip side. It was just 10% that relapsed. 90% didn't use. I think it was like a 3-year period, 90% didn't relapse.
Wow.
And it was all environment.
Huh. That's really interesting, actually.
Yeah. Cool, dude. Well, I feel like I could talk to you forever. I'm glad Caleb was like, you just need to talk to him.
Yeah.
But
Good stuff.
let's do this, man. If you were in front of, let's say, people who did drug prevention for young people, think back to your experience in middle school, high school, college, what tips would you give them to be more effective? Just from your own personal experience, or anything you would share about how you've chosen, you know, to not do that stuff at a young age. So is there anything that could be helpful to them?
Right. Yeah. I think that kind of like you talked about for the majority of this is that just kind of straight up, you can have fun without having to be under the influence of something. I think that who you surround yourself with is probably the biggest thing that you can directly do in just everyday life, not only for substance abuse, but for just you become your environment. And that's just proven over and over again by people and just all of throughout history as you become your environment. And so surround yourself with people that will make you better and push you to your own goals and not get you into tough situations or you know, press you into things. And if that becomes the environment that they begin to take part of, then be individualistic enough and responsible enough for yourself that you're okay with getting out of there. So that's what I would say. Be confident in your individualism.
Yeah. That's awesome, Jeremiah. Thanks again for talking with me. And for everybody listening, thanks again for tuning into another episode of Party Talk, where we empower leaders in youth drug prevention. We'll see you on another episode. And if you haven't already, please do us a favor, write a review, only if it's nice, and then hit subscribe so you don't miss any other episodes. Y'all have a great day.